Hey everybody, happy July. Greetings from New York and welcome to Achieve, a community committed to driving innovation and success through employee engagement. I am Jody Ordioni, Achieve's founder. Our topic today is around who owns internal communications, corporate communications, or HR. And I'm here today with Mira Slailati, Strategic Communications Manager of the MTA. As Director of Communications and Engagement at the New York City Transit, which is the largest public transportation system in North America, Mira works across talent and organization development, human resources, and corporate communications departments, and with employees and leadership at all levels to develop programs that inform and engage around NYCT's mission and strategic priorities. I know it's a topic of interest, and I know that I get asked this question time and again, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what today's presentation is all about. Just a few notes before we get started. This webcast is made possible through support from Achievers. Achievers, a behavior-driving employee engagement platform that listens to employees and aligns them with business objectives and company values. Achievers' award-winning employee recognition platform and active listening interface with insights enables enterprise organizations to accelerate employee engagement. A few other notes. Today's webinar will end at 3 p.m. Eastern, and we'll save 10 minutes for questions at the end. If you do have a question, please use the question box on your screen, and we'll get to it in the order it was received. All of our webcasts are certified for 1 credit with SHRM and HRCI, and tomorrow you will receive a very important email that will have these codes along with other things that you might be interested in, including a link to the webcast on demand, along with the content from today's presentation. We have more exciting things coming up soon, so make sure you visit the Achieve Engagement website and sign up for our next event, which is a What's Next event with Jason Lauritsen. As always, I ask all of you on today's call to let me know how we can continue to be a resource to you, to your organization and your professional goals. And to that end, I want to hear from all of you. So be sure to click on the link for feedback for today's webcast. And now, without further ado, let me turn it over to Mira Slailati. Mira, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Jody. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It's really great to be a part of this. And I just want to let you know that if at any point during this presentation, if you cannot see the slides or cannot hear me, please do let us know via the write-in control panels of the webinar. So thanks so much again, Jody. And Jody mentioned that today we are going to be discussing this age-old question: who owns employee engagement? So hopefully we will answer that or have some better direction by the end of this webinar. But before we begin, I do want to tell you a little bit about myself and my background, just to set the stage a little bit for what I'll be discussing. Now, I know Jody talked a little bit about my current role, and you can certainly read my bio and find out a little bit about where I've worked and some of the projects I've worked on, but it doesn't really fully tell you why and how I got into this area of internal communications and employee engagement. So I do want to share that a bit, because I've had the opportunity to sit in both the comms side of things and in HR. And it was kind of an interesting path that I took that allowed me to do that. I started out my career a long time ago here in New York at various local PR agencies, and that was a great first start to a career. You are allowed to work with many different companies and learn a lot of things about many different industries. And I was really fascinated with the automotive industry, and ended up going to Toyota for about 10 years. And that was a really immersive opportunity to learn about the business, to learn about the auto industry, and really grow with the company. And at the time that I joined Toyota, everything was rosy. We had reporters. I was doing PR, and reporters were just knocking down our doors, to get a story, to put us on the cover of a magazine and best companies to work for. The sales were through the roof, and we were pretty much the darlings of the auto industry at the time. And several things happened over the years, like the recession in 2008, 2009. We had some quality and safety issues that really put the company's reputation into question. And it took a toll on the business, and it took a toll particularly on the employees who were out there, you know, at the plants building these vehicles with their hands, literally. So they had a lot of pride in what they did, but we were getting beat up by the media for quite a while. And of course, being on the PR side, we made customers and media our priorities for getting our messaging out there. And who was communicating with our employees through all this? Well, it was lawyers for the most part. And, you know, having been an employee as well as somebody on the PR team, you know, I didn't particularly receive what was being shared with us very well. I felt like we owed our employees a lot more. So with the recovery of the company, you know, I became more involved in corporate planning and working with different functions to, you know, lay out the priorities for where the company needs to go in the future. And what stood out to us was that, you know, in addition to preparing to where the organization wanted to go, we had to prepare our people to move in the same direction with us. And so at the time, my manager said, well, there's a role in HR. You should just take that. And I was shocked because my impression of HR was at the time very transactional and benefits and payroll and, you know, corporate policies. I had no idea how to do any of that. But that opportunity really ended up being the best opportunity of my career because it became a chance for me to really understand what employees were thinking, what were the issues that were most relevant to them, and understand how we as a company were or were not addressing those issues. So that's what really got me involved in learning the language of culture and engagement, and the fact that this is not just, you know, fluff, that there is tangible research and data behind the impact of an engaged workforce and what it can do for your business. So that said, I've had roles in communications, I've had roles in HR, and outside of those areas completely. So I think that I've had a front row seat to how these functions need to work closely together to support an engaged workforce. So I will click through this presentation and want to mention some of the goals that I want to achieve with this discussion. And I'm going to share 3 case studies, 3 scenarios of things that I have worked on, you know, throughout my career. And I hope that from those, you can take away some practical and useful information. Often I know in these types of presentations across the industry, you hear a lot about the need to be more strategic and impactful and improving culture. And it's a lot of theoretical information, but you never really hear concrete examples of, well, how can I do this? And what exactly can I take away right now and apply to my job? So I want to make it as tangible as possible. And I hope that, you know, if there's something that you take away and it is relevant for your job or your business, you know, feel free to borrow. I do want to make a disclaimer though, you know, Jody mentioned what I do now at the MTA, New York City Transit here in New York. I work in a communications capacity, but I am not a spokesperson for the MTA. I'm not a media spokesperson for the MTA, nor am I a spokesperson for any of the other companies that we'll be talking about. But all of this is drawing on my work and my time there. Moving on, I want to start out first with a quick and hopefully fun poll. And it's a little poll, a little game that I like to call Let's Get Engaged. So this hopefully sets the stage a little bit more for what we're going to talk about. And Jody, I think, is going to pull up the poll as I read out the questions on your screen, and you can vote in your responses. And the first question to Let's Get Engaged is, a multiple choice. So when employees are engaged, they make more money, are happy with their job, are dedicated to their work, or 4, love their boss. So by filling out the poll, just send over your answer. When employees are engaged, I'll give it a second. Yes, the correct answer, and the majority wins, is they are dedicated to their work. So engagement, I want to put up the actual definition of engagement up in a second. Oh, here we go. This is an official, definition of engagement that I've used at various points, and it talks, as you can read along, engaged employees are actively involved and dedicated to their work and the organization. So that's the key word there, is that they are dedicated to their organization. So it's not even the same as happiness or job satisfaction. They're related, but it's not exactly the same. You can be happy or unhappy with your job on any given day, but dedication and going above and beyond and being excited to be part of an organization is something that is fostered over the long term. So really, engagement is about just that, fostering the behaviors and the culture where employees feel dedicated and involved in their organization and its mission, so that they're committed to not only doing their work, but really to helping the company succeed. And, that sounds like a really, nice dream world, and it is, but it's also more than just a nice to have. So it's certainly nice to have engaged employees working for your organization, but the truth is engagement is actually good for business. So engaged employees, when I said before there's tangible data behind engagement, these are some of those examples. So everything from performance or revenue or productivity or employee retention or better customer service, all of that can be directly tied to levels of engagement. Essentially, if you have engaged employees, they are going to be more productive. You're going to see lower absenteeism. You're going to have better customer service. And this type of impact is relevant for any organization or industry that you are a part of. So no matter what your success metrics are. So for instance, right now I work for the MTA. We are a public authority. We're a government agency. We may not necessarily be chasing after revenue, but some of the metrics that are most important to the work that we do are safety and reliability and quality, and certainly customer service. So all of those are driven by having an engaged team working for you. So the next question, if you want to write in, is what is a major driver of engagement? So this is a fill in the blank. Blank is a major driver of engagement. Is it money? Is it communication? Is it pizza? Is it working from home? So again, by answering the poll, what is one of the major drivers of engagement? Although all of these are great, it is communication. So engagement is not just about money or perks. And while those things are nice, and other benefits like being able to work from home and having flexibility, communication is really at the top. And the reality is that there are many drivers of engagement. I certainly couldn't list them all in that poll. But here on this slide, I have outlined a few. And I like to categorize these generally in 2 areas: organizational drivers of engagement. So those are the drivers essentially that bring people into your organization. So why do people want to come work for your organization? Because of its mission and vision, because of the culture, because of the HR policies and practices. And then the other drivers of engagement are more of what I call management drivers. So essentially, these are what keep people there. So once they come into your company, what keeps them there? What enables them and empowers them to do their work? So things like talent and professional development opportunities, the respect that they receive from leadership and the confidence that they have in leadership, and again, communication or information that they receive from the organization that helps them do their job. So already you're seeing that both communications and HR functions are critical for employee engagement. So the last question, and this is why we're all here, who owns employee engagement in an organization? So who owns employee engagement? And is it the communications department? Is it the HR department, managers, employees, or all of these? So yeah, I think everybody has got this. It is everyone. Everyone in the organization is responsible for employee communications. Sorry about that. So when it comes to who owns engagement, I said earlier that hopefully we can answer that question, but the truth is I have yet to see any one report or piece of research that really defines any one function or one department in an organization that's responsible for it. But the one thing that we do agree on is that everyone in every function plays a role. And that starts, from the very beginning when somebody sets foot in an organization and understands a clearly defined vision and priorities and builds that trust with their organization. It goes all the way into the HR process, from recruiting to developing talent, and through the information that I mentioned before, the communications, the information, the messaging, the channels that employees have access to, and in turn to how they behave in the organization and how they serve as brand ambassadors and advocates and how they talk about the organization. So engagement may start from the top with leadership and trickle down, but it really belongs in all levels and departments in an organization, and everyone is responsible for it. And if you think about nowadays how employees communicate with one another, or how they communicate with their networks via social media or with their friends and family, they carry the organization's message. So you want that to be as positive of an experience as possible for them. So although HR and communications functions do have a particularly more involved role, and I think that that is the case because both comms and HR really have a unique vantage point for understanding how all parts of an organization work. So essentially, there are two functions that do have a seat at the table when major decisions are made or when there are people issues that need to be managed across the organization, and you have to get the messages out to them. And also, HR and comms both essentially serve as a face of the organization to employees. So they're really among the only groups in the organization, other than leadership and your direct management, that have direct responsibility for disseminating messages and shaping perceptions. So I think working together, aligning HR and communications is an absolute must. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to discuss 3 examples, as I mentioned, from my own work experiences in organizations that I've been involved with that really highlight how engagement can very much sit in different parts of the organization, but how the most essential aspect of having an engaged workforce is aligning your HR and your communications functions. So the first example is from when I worked at Toyota, and it is about how aligning communications and HR functions can be very impactful when you're leading an organization through a major change. So I mentioned before that I spent 10 years at Toyota, and the majority of which were in a public relations, external communications function. But I did work in HR, and at the time that I was working in HR was around 2013, and that was a time when the company was really looking at the future direction of the organization. And at the time, in North America, Toyota was 35,000 employees across North America. And everybody thinks of Toyota as one company because we're so familiar with the strong brand reputation. But in actuality, Toyota was, gosh, it was more than 6, 7 companies in North America, if not more, dispersed across different states, different countries, different offices, each with its own leadership structure, each with its own ingrained cultures and policies. So it was not really one unified company. And if you can imagine that over time, this hurts efficiency, it hurts collaboration, and it certainly increases costs, and it hurts the company's ability to be flexible and make decisions in times of a crisis. So at the time that I was working there in HR, the leadership at a very, very senior level had made the really big decision to consolidate the company under one Toyota umbrella and essentially relocate all non-manufacturing operations and employees to Texas. So this would ultimately impact more than 4,000 non-manufacturing employees at the time. And they were mostly employees in engineering and sales and marketing and other support functions in 4 states across the country. So as you can imagine, this had tremendous external and media interest, but this time the priorities were really on how do we build this new org structure and how do we develop the people who need to be a part of it and lead it while keeping employees informed and engaged throughout the process, because this obviously required employees to make big and important decisions that really had a significant impact on their lives. So this is a couple of programs that we implemented where comms was integral to disseminating the messages, and HR came together to really develop the organization and to develop talent, knowing that there could be significant attrition and people leaving the organization once everything was said and done. So we had to design this new organization. We had to determine on the HR side what were the critical positions and the skills that we needed to lead the organization, and we needed to put the right people in the right jobs to lead it. So on the HR side, we developed a really comprehensive talent management plan to assess the skills currently in the organization and develop succession planning as well to have a leadership pipeline in place for the new organization. And this is not even to mention all the logistics and the relocation benefits and the compensation and the job support for family members and all the many other pieces that had to come together to make this restructure possible. And at the same time, the comms functions had to message this restructuring in a positive way to our employees. And by positive, I mean this is an important business decision that is not only good for the company, but it's going to be good for employees, because we wanted to, of course, retain employees so that they would make the move with us, maintain morale, and certainly ensure this continuity of productivity throughout all this, because something like this could be tremendously distracting and have an impact on productivity. And we had to make sure, as I said before, that employees had information to be able to make a really informed decision. So together, the two functions of HR and comms worked really closely together. We invested heavily in ensuring that we were disseminating quality information, that we were building memorable experiences, and that we had people and resources in place to manage all of this. And again, I mentioned early on that I want to make this discussion practical, so I'll share a practical channel that we developed just for this restructure. Were actually 2 channels, 2 websites that we collaborated on. And one was an internal website for employees, and one was also a website that would be available for their families, because we knew that employees and their families had to make this decision together. So it wasn't just about the employee that worked in our offices, it was about their family members and having the information that they needed. So things like, information on the new community in Texas where the company would be built. calculating expenses and taxes, information to learn about local communities and local school districts, and stories from employees directly about their decision-making process. So that's all of a lot of the content that we shared across these websites. We also put in place numerous events and informative programs for all employees and their families. So things as fun as just introducing, Texas barbecue to the cafeterias of our operations, but also things that were really more complex, like literally flying families to Texas. So every employee had the opportunity to fly with a family member to Texas and see the new community and experience it firsthand in order to help them make that decision. And lastly, we really got our executive team heavily involved in this. So leadership was the front line, was the face to this restructure. They went on roadshows across our facilities to pitch the benefits of this new organization structure, to talk about the decision process behind it, and hear from employees all over the country, because ensuring that those employees had an outlet to be heard and ask questions was very important to us. And so what you're seeing on the screen here is just a snapshot of what one of those websites looked like and the type of information that we shared on it. And so as a result of this alignment of HR and communications, in just 1 year, the company had pretty much, through the HR and the comms process and working with leadership, we had designed the ideal future organization. So essentially, beyond just an org chart, we had designed, the critical functions that need to be developed in this new organization, the people who would lead them, the key roles, and the individuals that were going to be a critical part of it. And as a result of the communications efforts, this was actually viewed as a positive business move. And we know that because we did a lot of polling, a lot of employee surveys. There were a lot of touch points with employees to really understand their thinking around this. So it was very much viewed as a positive and strategic business decision, not necessarily not a cost-cutting measure, which is absolutely not what it was. And not only employees saw it that way, but media and the industry really had that perspective as well. And not only that, but our employees told us that they felt that they had really comprehensive information to be able to make those decisions. And we know that that was the case because, most importantly, 75% of employees chose to stay with the company and to relocate to Texas. So, believe it or not, even the entire New York office, many of them who not even own or drive cars, except for myself, obviously, because I'm here in New York still, but most of the New York office also picked up and moved to Texas. So obviously, if you follow Toyota, they continue to maintain this strong culture and image, and they lead the list of best places to work and most admired companies. And they certainly have a very highly engaged and involved workforce. So another example that I want to talk about of aligning HR and communications is when you need to turn the business around. So you need to achieve business results. So I spent some time working with Etsy. And if you're familiar with Etsy, it is no longer a startup. It's a technology company. It's an online marketplace for vintage and handmade goods and crafts. And it's a great outlet for small business owners and entrepreneurs who are makers, who create things and want a broad audience and customer base for their craft. When I joined Etsy, it was no longer accurate to call it a startup. It was no longer a startup. It had gone public. The organization was growing. It had moved into this massive high-tech office space here in New York. And it was hiring upwards of 300 new employees in 2016 alone. So it was really growing at this massive rate. But unfortunately, the business was not living up to shareholder expectations, and shareholders and the board was getting pretty restless. So leadership at this point really wanted to foster this greater accountability across the company. We are no longer a startup. We are no longer this scrappy company. We have accountability to our customers, to our shareholders. We need to be more innovative, and we need to turn a profit. And that's what the company was focused on, or wanted to be focused on. But at the same time, we had to be very mindful that we were ensuring that this focus on profitability and turning the ship around was not going to conflict with that startup mentality and culture that Etsy was known for and was founded upon. So this time I was on the communication side, and I was managing employee communications and hundreds of channels and events that existed across the organization. So while the company was growing, it was still relatively small compared to other companies. It was 1,000 employees globally. Yet for some reason, there were hundreds and hundreds of channels and websites and blogs and message boards and newsletters. And just, it was inundating employees with communication. And we communicated about everything from product launches to benefits programs to our environmental focus, birthdays, company events, even the daily menu in the cafeteria. There was a communication about it. But the one thing we weren't communicating enough about, clearly, was the company's business strategy. So there were so many programs, but none were necessarily aligned with any larger business priority. So it shouldn't have come as a surprise when employees and even some leadership in the organization were shocked to learn that, you know, the reality that the company really was in this state of urgency and not turning a profit. So in this case, HR's focus was on instilling that mentality of accountability and developing a new goal setting process and a performance management process to roll out company-wide. So we can't be accountable if we've never spoken this language before. And that's where my role in employee communications came in. We had to start that conversation about accountability and define this new language and this environment that we were suddenly operating in. We had to take HR's programs and policies and new way of doing business and translate it to an employee base without losing sight of that people-focused culture and values. But at the same time, we had to be really clear and transparent about the difficult situation that the company was in. So this was not something necessarily that the employee base was familiar with. And of course, it could be a tough pill to swallow. So we really started by just assessing the current messages that were being put out there. What were these massive channels that we had, and what were we saying and doing within those channels that we needed to look at a little bit more critically? So things like, you know, a monthly all hands, a monthly staff meeting. This had literally been a talent show every month. Like, people would actually get up there and perform and read out essentially report outs of some of the different projects that they were working on. But it wasn't really aligned under a company strategy in any way. So we took those built-in staff meetings, which were a good channel to reach all of the employee base, and we shifted the messaging in them. For instance, we let the employees get up there and talk about how their work really focused on customer service and addressing the needs of the small business owners who are our customers. We had them talk about their product development strategies or the policies we were implementing on the site to make it more transparent. So essentially, anything that we were doing in our day-to-day work, the tone suddenly became, how does this support the mission of the organization, which is improving the lives of our small business owner customers? And that became the discussion at our monthly staff meetings. We looked at our internal blog and saw that a lot of the content was, you know, very much about monthly fashion updates or what our employees are doing on their vacations. And that is all important and fun and engaging content to have, but we had to balance it out with stories about our customers and how the teams in the organization contribute to our customers' success and the work and the craft that our customers, cherish. And our events, even, again, I mentioned there were monthly employee events, there were daily employee events, there were always opportunities for employees to socialize with one another and learn about one another. But what we started including in our regular events were our community partners and the small business customers who sell on Etsy, who sell their products on Etsy. And we started bringing them into those events so that they could not only just join in the fun, but it would give them an opportunity to talk about how they, came to do what they do, what their business has meant, and what working on Etsy's platform has done for their business and their families. And it really shined a spotlight on how our customers, do their business and how we support them. And lastly, education. Again, we have a series of events, but people were shocked to learn about, the revenue of the organization and how the organization actually made money. So we turned a lot of our events into more educational opportunities where we would get employees more comfortable with this new world of business and accountability. So everything from goal setting, how to give positive and feedback for new managers and their employees, to finance and marketing 101, everything that employees needed to know about our business priorities, how to grow the business, and be more transparent about, how the business could be successful. So as a result of those shifts and this combined approach from HR and comms, we were able to redefine the mission of Etsy, set goals and priorities for the company and for the individuals who are part of that company. So more than 1,000 employees, I mentioned before, globally, at the end of this process had developed their own individual goals aligned with the company's goals. And they came to have a better understanding of how their jobs and everyone's jobs support the core mission of the organization, which is our customers, and that everything that we do is in the interest of our customer. And I have not been with Etsy for a couple of years, but not too long after that. And, of course, there were other restructuring elements to this plan. And it certainly wasn't without its drama and its, major job cuts and leadership changes. But not too long after all of this, Etsy reported its first profitable quarter. So these efforts certainly did help in making that turnaround, and it's been in a much better place with shareholders and with employees ever since. So I know we're starting to wind down, but I do want to share one last case study, and this is from my work where I am currently at the MTA New York City Transit. And this is an example of how HR and comms can be aligned to shift an organization culture. Many of you, I'm sure, are from the New York area, so you're familiar with MTA, New York City Transit. New York City Transit is one of several MTA agencies, and it is the agency that essentially runs the subways and the buses in New York City, and is the largest of the organizations. So New York City Transit alone is about 50,000 employees, and the Department of Subways, where I am, is 30,000 employees. So again, one department is the size of all of Toyota in North America. And at the time that I first started with New York City Transit, I was not in the Department of Subways. I sat in a department called Talent and Organization Development. So I was not in HR and I was not in a communications function. And at the time, I mentioned New York City Transit is the largest transportation agency in North America, but it was facing a lot of challenges, and it still is. But at the time, I called those challenges the 3 R's. So the first one is ridership. Ridership was at record levels. The system was moving more than 8 million New Yorkers a day across subways and buses. So that coupled with the reality of the organization is more than, I shouldn't say the organization, the system is more than 114 years old. The subways were built, the first subways, in 1904. The infrastructure is 114 years old. So imagine 8 million riders a day on a system that's over 100 years old, and the infrastructure that's over 100 years old that is really struggling for funding, is being beaten up by the media, and that is highly political. That does not make for a very positive or engaging mix. And not to mention, at the time, because the organization, had been around for quite a while, and many people, as in the automotive industry, start out early in their careers, many folks were at retirement age. And at the time, I don't know what the situation is now, but at the time, over 40% of our managers were eligible to retire. So that meant that we were potentially facing this massive loss of knowledge and experience across the system if these people just got up and walked out. So leadership at the time decided that the organization really needed to rally around a new vision and priorities, to, again, turn the ship around and really shift the culture in the organization to one that is positive and highly energized and dynamic workforce. So they set out, leadership did, to define this new vision and the core priorities of the organization. And historically, I should say, the HR and the communications functions at Transit were largely transactional and reactive. And our communications function was largely external facing. So communicating with our customers about service delays and train information. We weren't necessarily in a position to be strategic about communicating with our employee workforce because it was so vast and in the field and dispersed. And we were very restricted to the type of organization that we are, a government agency, and how we can hire and develop talent to be able to shift this culture. So given the unique position of the group where I sat, talent and organization development, we were able to work directly with each department to really understand and kind of hone in on their unique challenges and opportunities, and really pull out the meaningful stories that define the organization and the people within that organization. So externally, while you may hear about train delays or infrastructure issues or politics or leadership turmoil, internally, when we talk to our employees, we were hearing about heroism. We were hearing about how folks rally together in times of crisis, how conductors, saved lives by administering CPR or rescuing people or animals from the tracks. We were hearing about skilled engineers and architects and technicians who worked 24/7 to respond to incidents. We were hearing about leaders who started out working on the tracks underground and rose through the ranks, and their dedication to this organization and to public transit. So those were the stories that we were hearing, but that weren't getting out to employees and the rest of the organization and to the public. So armed with these stories and experiences, we really set out to start engaging our employees and help shift the culture. And in this case, talent and OD led the effort, but HR and communications were essentially our vehicles to execute on a lot of these programs. So I said again that I would share some real life examples, and I do want to breeze through some of these because they're very simple, very practical programs that I think are relevant for any organization. And I do want to make the point that unlike Toyota or Etsy, New York City Transit is a government agency, so we certainly don't have the big budgets or the technology or the resources to do a lot, but this just demonstrates what you can do that is low budget, low tech, but really has high impact when it comes to engagement. And the first thing that we did was really align our leadership, the senior most people in the organization, around this language of engagement. And we started with them, and similar to what we did with Etsy, is we took what was already there. We had leadership meetings already in place. But the problem is that those meetings were really just a report out of different work that people were doing. We took those meetings and we shifted the dialogue in those meetings to be more about less about operational updates and more interactive discussions and team exercises about culture, about the business impact of engagement, how to have conversations with employees, about diversity and inclusion. So all these leadership and cultural elements that we had not talked about before. And we would always walk out of those leadership meetings giving our execs a set of guidelines of what they needed to take back to their teams, what they needed to cascade across the organizations, and essentially give them a toolkit to live by. And it turned from these boring, dull, dry report out meetings to sessions that became interactive and really standing room only. And we also worked with our leadership to be more transparent with employees and help, build trust and just be more visible and accessible to employees, particularly employees who are out there in the field. So little thank yous, little gestures of thank you from leadership to employees, like holding coffee chats and bringing employees in just to have an open dialogue, open Q&A, really helped foster transparency and build connections. We even took our leadership more out into the field to like really deeper parts of the organization, to our yards, to our maintenance shops, to work that was going on underground overnight on the tracks so that they could really see the challenges that our employees were dealing with and the circumstances that they work under. And it was really eye-opening for many of them who, may have grown up in that environment, but at this point had been so far removed from it. And it was wonderful for employees who never get a chance to come into the offices and really interact with senior leadership. And we did more employee recognition. And when I say employee recognition, again, it was really just grassroots, low tech, low budget, things like even putting on an employee graduation event every June. We found out that a lot of our employees, in addition to working full time, were attending classes and going through degree and certificate programs at the same time, and nobody had even known about it. But once we got a hold of that information and started literally reaching out to employees and asking them, they were thrilled just to be recognized. So we brought them together and we had executives speak to them and thank them for investing in their professional development and talk to them about how the organization in turn wanted to invest in them. And lastly, one of the most successful programs we implemented was an internal blog, profiling leadership, but really from the perspective of telling their personal stories and perspectives about what it's like to be a part of such a complex organization. So again, less technical, less here's the work I do, and more here's the type of person I am, and here's how I lead. And a blog in and of itself, I've said this many times, in this day and age is nothing revolutionary. But again, for an organization that had not had this level of interaction and transparency with its employees, it really was. It really involved taking our leadership out of their comfort zones and getting them to put their thoughts on paper and really express who they are and what drives them. And the audience, our readers, really loved seeing their leadership represented and talking about their experiences. We were limited in the reach that we had because I mentioned that our employees were largely in the field, but those who were able to access this blog suddenly felt that they had a channel to be able to respond back to leadership and team members, and they would reach out. And suddenly our leadership was getting emails from employees who were inspired by something that they read or thanking them for everything that they've contributed to the organization. So that is something that I consider to be engagement. It is not as tangible as measuring results of an engagement survey, but it's having that dialogue and interaction that is certainly engagement that the organization did not have before. And we're continuing to work on that, and we're continuing to build on these efforts through, more tangible things like, a really focused talent management process, changing the way that we recruit to be more effective and efficient, and measuring the impact of the work that we do. So those are all things that are in the works. And I'd like to say that we solved all of Transit's problems, but again, anyone living and working in New York and who uses the system knows that we continue to face many challenges. And there is extreme pressure on the agency and on its people. So this type of engagement is actually more important than ever now. But the truth is, our leadership has really recognized this. They've built engagement and communications programs into our new 5-year turnaround plan. And we're doing a much better job about working across departments on this plan and bringing employees from all levels of the organization into the work that we're doing. So the culture is shifting. We're not 100% there, but I'd like to think that these early efforts really help to lay the foundation for better culture, better engagement in New York City Transit. And really, that is it. I mean, the big point that I want to be the takeaway of all of this is that engagement, no matter what your organization, no matter how big budgets, how many big budgets that you have, it's really not about that. It's not about a very intense strategic plan. It's not about technology. It's really just about people, how leadership commits to their people, how managers model behaviors to their people, the work environment that we foster, and the trust that we build by communicating and connecting with our people. That's what makes people feel valued and empowered and engaged. And in that sense, everybody owns engagement in an organization. So that concludes the presentation. And I know that we wanted to leave some time for Q&A. And I know that many of you might want to take a minute to submit some of your questions online. We also had a few that were sent in earlier. So I'll turn it back over to Jody to moderate the QA.
Thank you so much. That was such a fascinating presentation. I do have a question for you with regard to mobile apps. Have you any experience using mobile apps to connect employees who are not at their desk all of the time?
Yeah, we get that question a lot. I mean, at Transit, certainly at previous organizations, yes, that is not an issue. All employees have either a company issued device or their own, and there were certainly no shortage of mobile apps. Here at Transit, that is a lot more difficult because our employees are in the field. They're not working in traditional offices, and it is also, I would add, a highly union represented workforce too. So there are certainly various parameters that we have to work with in terms of how we can communicate with employees and through what channels. So mobile apps are certainly things that we have implemented for our employees and our supervisors and our management levels who do have devices. And we do that by reaching them on their phones. All of our booths, the station booths, have iPads in them to support with customer service, so we can reach our station agents in the booths. And that's something that we're looking to expand. But again, a lot of our communications efforts are very grassroots and have to really reach employees where they are and where they work and how they work. So we do rely a lot on just traditional paper, traditional newsletters, posters, and heavily on that one-on-one interaction with managers and direct supervisors with field employees.
Thank you. Another question, when going through a difficult time of transition and facing attrition, what's the greatest way to keep people engaged, in your opinion?
I think being honest with them, being honest and being transparent with them. We saw it at Toyota, and we saw it at Etsy when it was I said in my presentation that some of the changes we were going through were really tough pills to swallow, but at the same time, it doesn't help anyone to sugarcoat or to make it something that it's not. You need to be transparent with your employees about the situation that the company is in, whether it's declining revenue or sales. You need to be transparent. And the approach that we took with Etsy that I mentioned about educating our employees on how the business works, I think really went a long way, because particularly when you're dealing with a technology organization and you have a lot of young millennial employees, for many of them, this was their first job out of school. And it may not be working in a business or an operations function. They're working on the site. So they may not have visibility into how the organization makes money or how an IPO works. So being transparent with them about how the company works and what we need to do to succeed, I think is really the best way to go when you're going through a change like that.
Great. And particularly as you're talking about the culture at Etsy, do you think that there are any forms of communication that are outdated that you would recommend not using?
No, it's funny because, to speak about my experiences at Etsy specifically, I went in there thinking, well, this is a tech company, so, we should probably have the most modern communications technology available to us. We build websites, we should probably only communicate online. And what surprised me the most was the amount of emails that were used to communicate. Everything went to employees via email, and posters. We had posters and digital screens in the hallways, but it was very much a lot of email, which is what, one time we would consider equivalent to paper and pencil. And that was something that worked effectively. So I wouldn't say do away with it and move everything to Slack. I think there's a time and a place and an audience for everything. And even today at New York City Transit, I mentioned we still do posters. What may be a multi-page press release for the public, we have to boil down into a couple of bullets and some infographics that are suitable for a poster. So even at Toyota also, that had unlimited budget for communications and marketing, the best way to reach our employees who are working in our plants was paper, newsletter, and posters. So there's a time and a place and a message and an audience for every channel. So I don't know that there was anything that I would completely do away with, but I would just be mindful of what you're communicating on that channel and who is receiving it and how they're receiving it.
Thank you so much. I just want to ask you to forward to the next slide so that I can make sure that everybody knows about the more exciting things that we have.
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. I missed this slide, but really this was just recapping what I had said.
Yep. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands what we have next week, August 8th, which actually is in 2 weeks. I want to thank you because this presentation was amazing, Mira. I want to thank everybody who is still on the call and remind you that tomorrow you will be receiving a very important email, in fact, 24 hours from 1 minute from now, with all of the certification credit codes and with the links where you can replay this through the webcast on demand. And we will also be sharing Mira's slide deck with you as well. So thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation, and I look forward to hearing from everybody on the call soon. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much.